The following is a presentation of the University of St. Thomas with campuses in Minneapolis and St. Paul, Minnesota.
Hello, everyone. On behalf of the University of St. Thomas, welcome to our webinar on change management with Tom Dybsky. Tom has spent 35 years in leadership roles with 17 years experience in global management. He has lectured on change management at Harvard Business School, Ukrainian Catholic University, the University of Minnesota, and of course, St. Thomas. Tom, thanks for being here.
Happy to be here. Today we're going to be talking about transformational leadership and positioning organizations for growth. And I think what will be important here as I take you through this Harvard Business case study that I was involved in, I think it's important to realize that the models, the process, the work that we did, it can really apply at any level, any type of organization, and really any industry. I've been using this model in my consulting business for the last 4 years and have literally been all over the world with the process. And I've worked with companies as small as 5 million and as large as 2 billion. I've worked with nonprofit, for-profit organizations, public sector, government sector, and all of this is really applicable. I think where it differs a bit is in terms of the execution and the elements that you apply. During the webinar, we will have we'll allow you to ask questions, but we'll try to keep most of those questions for the end of the session. Let me just get to the next slide here. What do you got? We'll be right with you. Okay, so very quickly, Jacob already gave you a bit of my background, but I had spent 35 years in the corporate world at 4 different corporations, Graco, St. Jude Medical, Carlson, and Tennant, and was in consulting at MDA for about 4 years, which was an organizational design corporation. In terms of functional responsibility, my primary responsibility or core area of expertise was in the human resources and OD arena. But throughout my career, I also had responsibilities for a host of other functions, including corporate communications, customer service, risk management, information technology, excuse me, and ran about $150 million service business at Tennant. In the last 4 years, in terms of my consulting work, I've done a lot of work around strategic planning. I have a lot of focus in terms of building high-performing leadership teams, doing assessments of leaders and coaching, and then certainly have done a fair amount of work around facilitating change and transformation. And in lecturing at a host of universities, typically my focus is around positioning organizations for growth and change management. So now just to take you into this Harvard Business case study. So I was at Tennant Company for about 16 years. I left there in July of 2014. And between 2000 and 2014, we went through a major transformation. And given the scope of that transformation, but also the success of what we were able to achieve, it did become a Harvard Business case study around 2010, 2011. So what I'll do today is take you through the highlights of that. And I'll try to make it as practical as possible so you can see ways in which you can apply it in your respective work with your current companies. So when I arrived at Tennant, it was really at a crossroads. The CEO was retiring. He had been in his position for over 35 years and was part of the Tennant family. His senior management team had been with him for 25 years at a minimum. So that whole group was going to be retiring, and we knew that in itself would bring about change. But in addition, the markets that they were in North America were contracting. So we were a manufacturer of floor cleaning equipment, sweepers, scrubbers, burnishers, and the customer was primarily the industrial sector. So heavy industrial organizations, steel mills, foundries, and the like. And at that time of this century, basically, they were either going out of business, many of them, or moving overseas. Additionally, we had little innovation. We were basically restripping our products and presenting perhaps a new face, but not new technology. And we really had no disruptive technology. In addition, we had some very inefficient processes. We had converted to SAP in the mid 90s, but by 2000, we really had bastardized that system where people didn't feel comfortable with it, ended up doing their own thing, getting their own software off the shelves. And so there was really no communication between, or a common platform between manufacturing and sales and marketing. So again, it was very inefficient. The leadership at the time was pretty autocratic, pretty tactical. And basically employees were told, you come in, you can have an employment for life, but keep your head down, don't challenge the status quo. And the top 3 or 4 executives will make all the decisions. So we had a pretty passive group of people that were really risk averse. And in turn, we ended up with an entrenched culture, people that really felt entitled, but really didn't want accountability. So as we look to the future, we said, the prognosis as we consider our strategic direction was really pretty bleak. Innovation was going to be critical, accountability, cooperation, a whole new culture was going to really be important at the organization. So I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with John Kotter, but was really one of the leading authors in change. And in his book in 1996 on leading change, he really talked about how many situations were failures. In his book, he says improvements have been disappointing. The carnage has been appalling with wasted resources and frustrated employees. A little bit dramatic here, but basically what he was saying that when you looked at the majority of change processes that were underway, transformations, that on average about 70% of them were not successful. And they were not successful because they were not planful, they were not thoughtful, they did not take specific steps in leading through the change. So we'll talk about Kotter's model a little bit and a couple of others as well in terms of how we applied them at Tennant Company. So the first model that I have here for you, this is John Galbraith, who was also another guru in change, and this was called the STAR model, obviously. But the 3 circles in green, strategy, people, and culture, is where Tennant decided that that's where we would focus. And our theme was linking strategy, people, and culture. And with alignment there, we felt we could really make a difference. And while Galbraith had strategy at the top of his chart, we actually flipped that and said, first we have to make sure that we have the right leaders in place, because we didn't feel that we had sufficient visionary thinkers in key leadership roles. So that was really our first step before we really began our transformation journey. So we did go out and we put some key strategic thinkers in some critical positions. And once we did that, then we were able to begin to take a look at our future direction, the business vision of the business and the direction that we wanted to take. Similarly, we had to take a look at our culture, because the entrenched culture, this culture of entitlement, really was not going to align with where we wanted to go and what we needed to get done. So those are the 3 areas that I'll focus on now in my presentation today. The other 3 circles in burnt orange, operating systems and processes, reward and recognition, org structure, we said those have to be addressed, and basically we'll use those to anchor change. But until we really get after strategy, people, and culture, we're not going to worry about those three circles. So Cotter's 8-step process, again, it's really pretty commonsensical. He's pretty diligent about taking this in order. We didn't take it in order. I think, we took a look at these 8 steps. We said, what is going to apply at what time? And then we will use it accordingly. And I will say that we did address all 8 of these as we were going through our changes, but it was over a period of about 6 or 7 years that we got through all of these 8. The other point that I would make is, where he talks about creating a sense of urgency, many of our people didn't feel that there was a real sense of urgency. So we didn't have a burning platform as far as many of our people were concerned. This was a 135-year-old company. They felt they had a good job, good pay, good benefits. So there was no sense of urgency in their minds. And so the way we presented this was, when we developed our new vision and new direction, we basically said, this is where we're headed. And in order to really have a more vibrant and profitable company, there's going to be some changes that we need to make. And so that's how we introduced it. We really didn't want to scare people by saying, we're going to go through a major transformation, buckle up, but rather we think we can enhance where we're at. We had an ESOP for all of our people. So we said, we can enhance your retirement benefit as well by growing the profits, improving our margins, and just being a more dynamic corporation. So we really didn't create a sense of urgency. So first, I'll talk about vision, then I'll talk about what we did around people, in particular leaders, and then I'll finish with culture. So in terms of creating a vision, basically, if you don't know where you're going, you won't know when you get there, right? Many of the organizations that I've worked with in my consulting business do not have a clear vision. They do not have a clear strategic plan. You certainly don't need something that's 20 or 30 pages. I think to have something, though, that provides good direction for where you're going, talks about where you're going, why you're going there, and how you're going to get there, and then how it impacts people is really critical, though, for getting people engaged and getting behind the strategies you need to put in place in order to achieve your vision. So in terms of vision, it's important that it is compelling. In order to have a compelling vision, people really need to have some passion about where they're going. I think relative to, I think on a TED Talk under Simon Sinek, if you ever get a chance to take a look at the discussion he has around motivating people and creating passion, he really talks about getting what you believe in, not so much about the product that you're manufacturing. You create the passion by getting to a point where people really believe in what you're doing and why you're doing it. Then you need to make sure that you have clear and focused strategies to drive that vision. And you need leadership that really can transform the business in getting there. This next slide really shows you the evolution of Tennant's vision. So when we first started out, around the year 2000, we just said we were a North American manufacturer for horizontal cleaning services, growing at 4 to 5%. Not very exciting. Basically, we said, we push dirt around on floors. And our growth rate was pretty meager, 4 to 5%. That it was also in that market segment, it was a market market opportunity of about 10 billion. So in a lot of regards for us, it was pretty limited. I think the next step, we said, well, instead of North America equipment manufacturer, we're going to be a global. So still not very exciting. It took us about 3 years. So in about 2003, in a pretty engaged process, over a summer, we had about 70 people involved in our strategic planning process. We came up with the theme of lean, clean, and green. And what that meant was we want to be able to provide solutions where we can clean better than our competition, where we will do it in a more efficient manner or lean. And then I think where we really hit a home run was when we decided to get into the sustainability side of things, where we said, when our solutions are green, that's where we created the passion. That's what our people really believed in. So, you know, they could get excited about coming to work when they realized that we were enhancing the environment. And that was really the green piece. We said we want to be able to clean in a way that we're not going to harm the environment, and ideally we're going to improve it. And what that led to was creating some disruptive technology where we were able to clean floors without chemicals. And we used it with about 1/10 of the volume of water that our competition was using. So we hit a home run in two regards. First, we could do it in a way that we weren't putting harmful chemicals down the drain. It was the residue was neutral. And secondly, we were using much less water than our competition. The other thing, by using less water, there was less dampness on the ground, so slip and falls were dramatically improved as well. And now we said we want to grow by 7 to 9%. And this put us in another level of market segment. So we took our market opportunity really from about 10 billion to 50 billion, because we said now we can get off the floor with this kind of technology. We can be cleaning windows and walls and cabinets, et cetera. So it really provided some excitement. And then the last evolution of our vision was when we said, we want to be an innovative world leader in sustainable cleaning technology. So now not only are we going to be about cleaning floors, but we want it to be a leader in sustainable cleaning technology. So again, that was something that really created some passion and excitement with our people. This next slide is just a way that we were communicating with our people. So if you go back under Cotter's 8 steps, one is communicating the vision. So this was really important for us. We wanted to make sure that our people understood where we were going, how we were going there, what our progress was, and again, what impact this could have on them. So in this slide, on one page, we were able to put what our vision was, what our objective was for, at that time, the next 3 years, and our key strategies under growing the business and under running the business. And this illustration where you see the highlighted, the blue strategies, that's where for that particular quarter, we would be reviewing those specific strategies for our people and giving them an update. So each quarter we were reviewing our strategies with our people, giving them a business update. And then at the very bottom, you see something called stewardship. That was around our values. And we literally went around the world and interviewed our employees and asked them, what's important to you as an employee at Tennant? And we had focus groups, and what they came back with was a term called stewardship. And basically it said that Tennant is steward to its 4 constituencies, to its employees, to its community, the local community and the broader community, to the investment community, and to our customers. And the theme was that we will leave things better than we found them. So basically, anytime we had a change, say for example, with our compensation program, with our benefits program, with products to our customers, we wanted to make sure that we were not harming those constituents with any changes that we were making. So this became a very dynamic filter for us in our business. So that's about the vision. And again, it was really challenging to have a vision that people could be passionate about and really engage behind. Next, it's about people. And we had, at the time, 3,100 employees. We had a relatively small HROD group, and we said, we're not going to be able to focus on all 3,100 employees. So the strategy we employed was that we decided if we focused on our key leaders in the organization, and we made sure that we had what we defined as world-class leaders, transformational leaders, and then held them accountable for cascading those competencies down through the organization, we could be pretty effective. So, the first premise was we needed to make sure we had the right leaders in the right jobs. And we identified, it was about 70. That number fluctuated a little bit between 65 and 75. But we identified these as individuals that played a critical role in driving strategies that were important for achieving our vision. And so in identifying these 70, we said we want to make sure that we have transformational leaders. And we defined that as leaders who were visionary, who were strategic, and who were inspirational. So they could create a vision, and that could be for their department, for their function, for their business unit, whatever level they were at. They needed to have a vision that aligned with the corporate vision, but what did they have to do in terms of their respective group in order to support the broader vision of the organization? The strategic part was they had to understand what strategies they needed to put in place in order to achieve that vision. And finally, the inspirational part was we needed leaders who knew how to build high-performing teams. They knew how to pick the right people at the right time. They knew how to train, how to develop, how to encourage them. So that was really critical. Our focus, as you can see on this next slide, initially was under running the business as it was on operations. We felt that our operations were running at too high a cost. We had to lean that group. Under growing the business, we said that if we're going to grow this business, we really need to move from a marketing communications function where it was really just supporting sales to strategic marketing. We needed a team that knew how to analyze the market, analyze customers, understand the markets that we were in, how could we increase penetration in current markets, how could we move to new markets, and what products could we be introducing to, again, grow our business and our profitability. Under sales, we needed to move from just a single point of sale to selling a solution. So we needed our sales personnel, our sales staff to be thinking in a much broader manner than they had in the past. And then under R&D, we had primarily populated that R&D group with mechanical engineers. We said if we want to move into innovative, sustainable products and have disruptive technology, we need to bring other types of engineers and scientists into play. So we went out and we recruited material scientists, systems people, biomechanical people. And this really gave us an infusion of new talent and much more creative kinds of thinking. So when we looked at our leaders, we assessed them using a host of tools. The first tool that we put in place, what we called our global leadership competencies. So this was really a leadership profile. We said, looking at our vision and the direction of the business, what are our challenges and opportunities? And given those challenges, what kind of leaders, what kind of competencies do we need to have in place? Once we built that leadership profile, then we integrated that into any area where we would be assessing our leadership. So we integrated it into our selection process, into our performance management system, into succession planning, into training and development. So again, anywhere where we would be able to assess and or develop our people, we incorporated our leadership competency profile. The other thing that we did that we found very useful was team assessments. That's the bottom right circle there. And what we started out with was the CEO and initially with Janet Dolan and her team, and then Chris Killingstead, his team, where each year we assessed the talent that we had in the organization. And so we would have a roundtable discussion, and each of the executives would have to get up and talk to all of their key leaders in their organization. What are their strengths? What are their development needs? And then each one of the other participants could challenge that person. And I think what happened was, the first couple of years, it was really about calibration, saying, I agree with your rating or I don't agree with your rating. But when it became really rich was when our operations head was saying, this person in your marketing function, I think I could really use that person. I really like the talents that they have. We took people from operations, we moved them into marketing. We moved people from my HR group into the sales organization. We had my one individual who was a director of compensation and OD. We moved him over to Europe to head up the HR function there. He did that for 3 years. On his way back, we had a temporary opening in our China plant. So we put him in as plant manager for 6 months. And then when he came back to the States, the sales VP, through these discussions, realized some talents that he had, and he took him on as a regional sales director. And today he is the managing director over in international. And a lot of this happened because of these team assessment processes that we put in place. And because of the success that we had with that process, it eventually cascaded all the way down through the organization. And they were doing it all the way down to the department levels. So this became a great tool for us. This next slide is on our performance competencies. And this is kind of a high-level overview. These were the 5 competencies that we put in place back really in 2000. They've evolved a little bit since then, but there has been dramatic changes. But the 2 really pillars were around leadership and emotional intelligence. So as I talked before, the leadership, the transformational leader being visionary, strategic, and inspirational was critical. And then the emotional intelligence was really important, being self-aware, empathetic influences, key elements for effective leadership. Now, we had more items, more definitions for each of these, but this gives you kind of a high-level look. I think the other thing that was really interesting to note was that as we built the leadership teams, and down the road, if a leader, particularly in these 70, did not work, and we had to move them out, the primary reason, I would say almost 100% of the time, was around emotional intelligence. That they were not self-aware about perhaps their strengths, their weaknesses, how they were coming across, or how they were communicating with people, or they might have been communicating in a very autocratic manner. But emotional intelligence was consistently a reason for us moving an individual out, for an individual not being successful in a senior management role. When we did our assessment of our leadership team, and again, we used probably 4 or 5 inputs for each of the 70 individuals that we assessed. In 2000, we found that 35% of that group was not competent to take us forward for any number of reasons. We also looked at the yellow bar there. That's at 45%. Our target was 30%. And basically, this is really challenging for management, because what we're saying with the yellow is that the individual is competent at this time to do their job, but they're not going to be able, in most instances, to take us to the next level, to really help transform the business. And so we had to make some tough decisions there. And then you can see we assessed, of that 70, about 20% of that population were really transformational leaders. Now, the target that we have, that 70-30, it was somewhat arbitrary, but we felt that when we looked at our top leadership, our top 70, that we really wanted to have the majority of that group be transformational leaders, people that could really take us into the future. At the next level, when we moved down a bit, we targeted more like 50-50. And then when we get down to first line supervision, we said, okay, maybe about 25% of that population is going to be transformational. And that's more about those individuals having some high potential and opportunity to move up through the ranks in the future. But I think we did a very good job between 2000 and when I left in 2014 to maintain pretty close to the target that we had established. And so every year we really took a hard look at the leadership that we had and making sure that we had the kind of transformational leaders that we needed to drive our business. So again, this is part of, Cotter's 8 steps, building a leading coalition. And it was really these 70 that were really driving the change that we had at Tennant. And, that was about 5% of our population. So I think as you look at your organization, the size of your organization, this number is probably anywhere from 5% to 15% of your organization, typically, of the kinds of leaders that you want to have in place that are really dynamic. These were some of the programs that we put in place to really anchor the kind of change that we needed to have happen. So again, I mentioned the leadership competencies. I talked about our comprehensive assessment process. We did a lot of work around talent review and succession planning. We put a new performance appraisal process in place that was really about accountability. So the first section was really responding to how people were performing against their objectives. The second section was how well do they perform against those leadership competencies. And then the final section was around training and development. What were their strengths, what were their development needs, and how might you go after developing some of those weaknesses. And then we revised our compensation program, and I'll touch on that in a little bit. So again, under Cotter's 8 steps, this was really about moving some of the obstacles and anchoring change. So we've talked now about vision. We've talked about people with the focus really on leadership. This is now around culture. And, culture is dynamic. It is fluid. It needs to adjust as the business adjusts, as you shift direction. What are the new behaviors? Maybe even some values change, in order for you to realize your vision. So what happens when a new strategy clashes with an old culture? Well, culture eats strategy for lunch. No matter how good your strategy is, if your culture, if your people don't align with that in terms of behaviors, in terms of their values, the strategy will go nowhere. So it really is essential that as things are changing, that you work with your people to adjust to that change. And that's oftentimes one of the biggest roadblocks for successful change. So at Tennant, on the left there, we had a real sense of entitlement. So we had people that, there was real narrow focus. They were told, pay attention to your job description. Don't go outside those borders. It isn't about doing whatever it takes, to appease your customer. It's pay attention to your job description and don't challenge the status quo, right? So a lot of activity focus. We had a lot of silos at the company. We had really very poor metrics, if any, and there was a lot of aversion to taking risk. What we needed, if we were going to move to a much higher level of performance, we needed people who really embraced a performance-based organization, who were willing to take responsibility and accountability. Collaboration and cooperation, it's 180 degrees from silos. And we needed to have much more cooperation. We needed people who wanted to be empowered, who wanted to go beyond their job description and do whatever it took to appease your customer, whether it was an internal customer or an external customer. So this was a major shift for us, and this really took a lot of work for us as well. Just to give you some highlights in terms of some of the things that we did to anchor that change. So for example, the individual factor on the left of the first bullet, STI, that's our short-term incentive plan, or the annual incentive plan for management. In the past, we were paying incentives based on financial goals and targets. So if the financial target targets were hit, we would pay out an incentive. What we said is no longer is that going to be the case. We'll have a financial target, and we moved from top line to bottom line, profit margin in particular. And what we said was that if we hit the target, that will fund the plan. We will pay out to individuals, though, based on individual objective achievement. So everyone on the plan had 3 to 5 objectives. They had to achieve at least 80% of those objectives. So if you achieve less than 80%, there was no payout. If you achieved, let's say, 90%, then you received 90% of whatever the funding level was. So it was multiplicative. So if I achieved 95% of my plan and it was funded at 100%, I would get a 95% payout. So we really built accountability into this program. The other thing we said is that the strategies needed to be tied to the strategic direction of the business. And if an individual on the plan could not demonstrate that, then they were not on the plan. They would be put on some kind of, some other plan. In terms of other entitlement issues, we had a step progression in the shop, which means when you come into a shop position, drilling, lathe operator, you started at the minimum, and every 6 months you received an increase in pay. We said no longer is that going to be the case. We moved to merit pay. So we said now it's going to be a function of how well you perform your job, how many skills that you've learned, and also teamwork. So that would determine what their pay was going to be. The other thing is we moved from a profit sharing plan, from a pension plan to a profit sharing plan. On the right side, we talk about informal, but that's a lot of that has to do with communications. So in the plant, for example, we developed focus groups. So we asked for volunteers. We had as many as 50 volunteers for these focus groups. And what we did is we trained them in terms of what would their participation be. We said, you're not going to make final decisions, but you will give us input in terms of decisions that we're making. In particular, programs, practices, policies that would affect you in your job. So for example, when we were making a change to compensation, of the 50, we would ask for 7 volunteers. We'd put a committee together, and then we'd share with them what the changes were going to be. We'd get their reaction, and we would oftentimes make adjustment based on their input. But this became a great tool for us in terms of engaging with our plant people. The other change that we made that really was a big hit with our employees is we put in a program called our Leading Edge Awards program. And we built that around our values and some of our competencies. Basically, we had 6 categories, and anyone could nominate a coworker, a supervisor, anyone in the plant. And so out of 3,100 people, we typically had about 10% of our population would be nominated for these awards. And they would be nominated throughout the year. And then at the end of the year, we developed 6 employee committees, and the committees would review the nominations, and then they would decide on the winners. And then what we did is with these winners, and typically the number was in about 75 to 100 people, we would take them away for a long weekend. So we went to Costa Rica, we went to California, there were several other places. And we'd get there on a Thursday night, we'd have kind of a cocktail hour or so and give people a chance to meet with each other. The next day, they had an opportunity to go on different touring events, which were all volunteer. And then that night we had a big awards banquet. And they also would bring a significant other with them. So it was really a great time for these people to celebrate successes, to celebrate their achievements. And then we always gave them a really nice award that they could take back to their workstation with them. And people really loved it. And we, shop people, you'd go out there and you'd see they'd have the award display on their workbench. And it was just really a great way to reinforce kind of our values and the vision of the organization. So those were some things that we did, again, to anchor the changes that we were looking at, particularly around the values of the organization and the culture. So I'll take now a few minutes and go through just some of the results that we saw from all of these actions that we put in place. So in terms of really building our transformational leadership team, again, I think I mentioned this, but between 2000 and really 2014, we were really able to keep very close to the targets that we had in terms of, 70%, we wanted people that were really transformational, and the 25% number in terms of competent. In terms of operations, with the teams that we brought in place, with the changes that they made, we were able to take out 50 million in expense through lean operations, through global sourcing. So that was really a significant impact on our business. In the R&D group, with the new types of scientists and engineers that we brought in, we were able to have a much more vibrant new product pipeline. So before we had a fairly weak pipeline. When I left in 2014, we had over 100 new products in the pipeline, and we had introduced 3 disruptive new technology. And the one that I mentioned, what we called ECH2O, where we were able to scrub floors without chemicals, that's technology today that the competition has still not been able to meet. And that received, you can see, all kinds of awards for its effectiveness. We increased productivity by about 20%. So in 2008, our sales were about 700 million. We had 3,100 employees. 6 years later, we'd increased that number by 100 million in sales, and our employees were 100 less. And basically, that was about getting the right people in the right jobs and structuring jobs where people really were making a contribution. One of the things that we were really proud of was our ability to, at the executive level, be seen as trustworthy. So this was a nice award from Forbes, but what was even more important to us was with the engagement surveys that we did, 08, 012, and 14, where we saw some of the highest scores in terms of trust and confidence in the senior management team. We were very concerned with all the changes that we were making that may erode, but in fact, it was really strengthened. And I think, again, it had to do with the communications that we put in place, people understanding where we were going, why we were going there, how we were going to go there, and the impact on them. All very critical parts. From a financial perspective, between 2000 and 2003, when we were just starting this transformation, you can see our numbers were negative. Now, as you recall, we had a mild recession then. So even if you normalize those, you can say that, okay, maybe we were flat. But as we got things underway, you saw some numbers really take off in 2004 in terms of sales, in terms of our stock, in terms of our earnings per share. And then we had additional changes between 07 and 09, and we saw another nice uptick in terms of our financial performance. And then our stock price certainly took off. Now, if you normalize things for the crash of 2009, and you go out to 2011, our stock before the crash was at 36. And so from 2011 through the second quarter of 14, we still had a 31% compounded annual growth rate in our financial performance, or in our stock. And again, a lot of that had to do with, well, the performance of the business, but also as the investment community saw what we had done with the leadership team, the strengthening of that, with what we had done relative to cost and efficiencies. And then again, what our vision was, where we were going and how we were going to get there, were all pieces that played into the strength of our stock. So that's a high-level overview of what happened in Tennant over about a 14, 15-year period. Some of the resources that we've used in building our models, you can see on this page. I think that, the Leading Change book by Cotter on the left side, the fourth one down, is a nice primer if you're looking at change and some of the basics for change. I think some current things on the right side, the neuroscience of trust by Paul Zak, that was in the Harvard Business Review this year, January, February, is really a great article in terms of how to build trust and the impact that has on productivity in your business. And then also I mentioned Simon Sinek in terms of how great leaders inspire action. That's really, it's about an 18-minute TED Talk, and he really does a good job in demonstrating how you go about creating passion. So I think with that, if we can take some questions now, we've got about 10 to 15 minutes to do that. So I will be happy to address those.
Yeah, so we've got questions coming in. First one, you spoke about marketing management and messaging. How much time and money was allocated to this new area of corporate focus?
So in terms of marketing and messaging, I think that first of all, it really started with moving from a marketing communications function to a strategic marketing. So we did build a new marketing team, and that took us some time and energy, but it was really about that marketing team and our communications group. So the communications function actually reported into me in my role as an SVP of administration. And there were two people in that group. I worked with them in terms of a lot of our employee communications, and actually they helped build the brand with the marketing group. So, my initial reaction was we didn't spend a lot of money in terms of hiring a third party and coming up with the branding. What you saw in this presentation was really a result of our internal staff. However, we did spend money in bringing in new talent to create a truly strategic marketing function. But we did not use a third party. We created all of our brands and employee messaging with internal people.
All right, awesome. In your experience, who's typically responsible for driving culture? I know we all own it, but who ultimately determines and builds the adoption?
In terms of driving culture, for it to be successful, you need to really have top management, the CEO, they need to be embracing this. I think that if you have a human resources function, an OD function, I think they can be a key agent for that. And I think what we really found effective was kind of a grassroots build of our values. As I mentioned, we really did have a focus group. My director of corporate communications went around and interviewed people from a host of plants around the globe, actually, to get their input, and then worked with some teams to develop the messaging and the idea around stewardship and also associated values. So it was a ground up kind of process, but our senior management team, they really had to embrace it, and they had to role model it. If that wasn't happening at the senior level, with the senior level group, it wasn't going to happen. And to be honest, we had a couple of instances where we had a couple of senior people that really didn't role model all of our values. And that was a real issue. So until that got dealt with, and actually until they left the organization, it was a problem. So I think that whenever you can have it bubble up from the mass, that's great. But it can also come from top down.
Okay. How did you phase out the pension program without hurting or disincentivizing employees, especially employees over 40?
I would say that we didn't do a very good job. I think that as we moved out that pension plan, we had a lot of people that were very disheartened by that. We in fact, we were a non-union shop, but we had a union drive because that was one of the major reasons. we defeated the attempt, but it was a very difficult process. We actually brought in KPMG, and they did individual financial sheets for people, so people could see what the impact would be, what they had in their retirement, where they were going to be in the future with this pension plan. And I would say until the crash in 2009, so we made the change, I believe it was in 2002, we had a lot of disgruntled people. And so, you know, about all the counsel I can offer here is, number one, be very thoughtful of what you're doing, be very clear about what you're doing, and just continue to communicate and communicate and communicate with the people. But I think the other thing that you have in your back pocket is that there are very few companies today that are continuing with pension plans. They're just not affordable. And somehow you have to get that message across. But it's very difficult. It's a very difficult thing, and it's not easy. But, you know, again, I think the key thing is be very clear what you're doing, why you're doing it, how you're doing it, and just communicate over and over again.
Okay. I have a question from someone who says, we are an agency working with a large retail client. Our client's business is constantly changing, and we have been doing our best to adapt and evolve with them. What are some specific strategies that work better in large organizations versus smaller teams or businesses?
Yeah, I think that, you know, if you look at the model that I used here, or that I referenced in terms of connecting people, strategy, and culture, you know, I think no matter what size the organization is, I think that's what you have to be looking at. So when you look at an organization that you're servicing, you have to understand what is their vision, where are they looking to go in 3 to 5 years. And given that vision, what are the challenges? What are the opportunities? And then based on those challenges and opportunities, does it impact the culture? Does it redefine the culture? Does it impact your culture? And you know, in the example that I gave with our R&D group, with our vision change in moving from really mechanical engineers to material scientists, because we wanted to be about sustainable innovation, that really changed the kind of people and the kind of competencies that we brought on board. So again, I think if you take a look at the strategic direction of your client and where they're going, what changes are going to happen, then you need to take a look at what you're providing for them and how does that change. Do you have the competency set in your agency to meet their demand? Do you have the kind of norms and values and behaviors that will align with the direction that they're going? And I think if you can get that alignment, then I think you can be pretty successful, pretty effective in dealing with their changes.
Okay, how did you measure whether a leader was transformational?
So how did we measure whether a leader was transformational? So again, I think we had put out those characteristics. We said we want people who are visionary, who are strategic, and who are inspirational. So first on the front end, when we were recruiting or selecting people, we had to ask behaviorally based questions that really got at those kinds of competencies. So we would want to see, how did a person demonstrate their ability to be visionary? So we would ask them questions in terms of their work. What kinds of visions did they create? What was the direction they set? You know, and what were the challenges and opportunities? Similarly, we'd ask them, you know, very direct questions in terms of strategy. Tell us about how you got there. What were some of the challenges? And how, you know, as challenges occurred, how did you deal with those challenges? And then the inspirational part was, you know, we would ask them questions around the teams that they built. How did they go about building those teams? How did they get their people engaged? How effective were they in achieving their goals and objectives? And I think with the people internally, what we would do is we would measure those areas in terms of their performance on the job. Were they achieving results? How were they achieving those results? Was it through mandate, or were they engaging their people? Did they have a high degree of turnover? How committed did people seem to be, to that leader, to that leader's vision? So again, we would take a look at those key characteristics and see how well they played out with that individual.
Okay. And for those leaders that you deemed competent, what opportunities did you offer them to develop their skill set?
Yeah, in terms of when we went through that assessment and we said that, about 45% of that group, we were concerned that they could really take us to where we wanted to go. And similarly with the group that we labeled as competent, what we did is we sat with each of these people and we said, all right, here's the former leadership profile, here's the new leadership profile, and here's the gap. And so, you really have three options. The one is we will invest in you and we will help you in every way we can to close that gap and get to the next level. If you don't want to do that, then you can post for something else in the organization and we will give you preferential treatment if you meet minimum qualifications, and we'll move you into that job. And if that doesn't work and you're just not aligned with where we're going and you want to leave the company, we'll give you a generous severance package and we will help you transition out. So we'll give you time off from work to interview. We may help train you in different fields if that makes sense. So we said we want to treat our people very respectfully. We want to give them every opportunity to succeed, whether it's in Tennant, in a current job, in a new job, or outside of Tennant.
Okay. And how has your work evolved since working at Tennant? How has the strategy behind managing change changed in the last 5 or so years?
Yeah, I think that, what I have found in the last 4 years or so of consulting work, I think the one surprise that I've had is it really hasn't mattered where I've worked. I've now been consulting, across the U.S. I just came back from Dubai. I have a number of clients in London. I find that they all resonate with the same kinds of things, and that is around strategy, around people, around culture. I think probably the two biggest challenges for organizations is around having a good strategic plan, and it's also around having the right leaders in the right jobs. I think with a number of groups that I've worked with, it's been very difficult for them when they see the assessment and see where their leadership is and that it's not aligned with the direction that they want to take. It's very difficult, particularly for smaller businesses, to want to move these people out or to make some changes. And my counsel there is, this is what you can do in terms of development, but if you choose not to do anything, then you need to change your vision and your goals, because it's not fair, because you're not going to achieve them. But I think that a lot of the principles, the basic principles that are in place, I think the Cotter's model, I think the Galbraith's model applies. I think there's a number of other models out there. I really like the work with Cynic. I think this whole idea about creating trust in the environment, creating an engaged work environment. I think with the millennials, they really want to see value. They want to see that they're making a contribution that is valued, and they want to see that they are valued. I think that's probably some of the biggest changes that I've seen. And it really is putting a much greater demand on leadership and being able to fulfill that request.
All right. And last question here. What examples do you have of firms that manage change poorly? What mistakes did they make that contributed to that? And what did you learn from that and grow from?
I think the biggest mistakes that I've seen with organizations that have not been successful, number one is a clear vision. Really, understanding what the change is, and that change can be at a very small level. It doesn't have to be at a enterprise-wide level, but oftentimes it is not clear. It's basically, we're going to make a change. Let's do it and get on with it. And so they don't take into consideration the impact that it has on people. And you know, people want to know how they can contribute to this change, but they also want to know how it's going to affect their job. So I think that having a clear vision is critical. And the other part is the communication, how clearly they're communicating what that change is. And then I think the final piece of it is anchoring that change. So if it requires some behavioral change by people, you need to put programs and practices in place that reinforce those new behaviors.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you so much, Tom, for doing this. We're getting great feedback right now in the chat from some of our attendees. And yeah, thank you so much for being here today.
You bet. Gotta get out.
All right.